Okay, and we're live. Okay, well, welcome everyone. This is Colin once again, aka Aussie CDA on YouTube, and this is the first episode of the podcast Dreaming in Symbols. I'm my co-host today and special guest is Wayman29 on YouTube, and just a little brief introduction about the show. Dreaming in Symbols is a show dedicated to exploring spirituality and religion from the perspective of psychology and non-dogmatic literalistic approach. While most discourses are characterized by reductionism, skepticism, and traditional organized religion, this show offers a third path. Topics will cover religion, theology, psychology, mythology, history, archaeology, literature, and the news pertaining to the overall theme. Special guests and co-hosts will be a regular addition to the show. So, like I said, besides me being here today, I also have Wayman29, who was nice enough to join me for this this first episode. So, thank you again, Wayman, for being here.
Sure, no problem. Glad I could make it.
So, the topic that I proposed for this first broadcast was Carl Jung's approach to religion, and I thought, maybe a nice nuance to that particular topic was perhaps you and I could talk about, the impact that Jung or Jungian psychology has had on our own study of religion and mythology. Since I know that you and I have talked for a few years now, and I think we can both agree that Jung has had a pretty big impact on our studying of religion, how we might approach religion. So I thought that might be a good way to begin is perhaps if you wouldn't mind starting with sort of, what Jung has done for you in your studying of religion.
Well, I think back when I was coming out of evangelical fundamentalism, it was huge in that YouTube was new. And 2004, 2006, also hit this huge atheist online movement. Rational Response Squad, Britt Keane, the Amazing Atheist was just coming on the scene out of his garage, and Captain Awesome, and all those people just made the exchange amazing. And coming out of that evangelical fundamentalism, I kind of became, for a short period of time, an angry person because I just wanted to retaliate because I felt like I'd been ripped off and there had to have been something better. Then I quickly realized that I was becoming an anti-fundamentalist, which means I stopped and thought about it one day and I was like, I am no better than the religious extremist attacking fundamentalism itself. Because in my mind, just like today, a lot of atheists are stereotyped as being extremists and extreme atheism. You hear it all the time in evangelical circles, especially with the movies coming out, God's Not Dead, 1 and 2. There's a lot of stereotypes, situations that would not happen. So I got thinking, well, not every Christian is a fundamentalist. And just like every atheist isn't an extreme atheist. However, there are, certain groups to that. So I had to salvage it in some way. So I needed to disassociate myself personally from those types of stereotypes in what I seen was extreme atheism, because Rational Response Squad was huge and they were doing the blasphemy challenge, all kinds of stuff. And any conversation I would get into with Christians, just debating apologists, I ended up being ignored almost, because they took me as a non-believer who was an extremist, and I'm just like all these other people who were kind of in your face. They wouldn't even listen to me. So I actually had to go with the term agnostic, which means simply, I don't know. So now I can enjoy all that. And I really love the literature, and I really didn't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater when I left, because I guess Joseph Campbell, who was a student of Carl Jung, saved me from going all the way into atheism and saying, well, maybe this, because there are some things that you can use. And what's amazing about it is the metaphors are interchangeable. And that's what a lot of people don't really understand. So when you get into the topic of devotional reading, it's not all devotional for me. It can act. It needs. You need to find yourself in it. And myth always tells you where you're at a certain point in time, and you might not realize it. Maybe reading Alice in Wonderland, like, man, I'm going through all this. Oh, it's amazing. And you find yourself either intentionally or accidentally falling into it, and you realize it's a part of your life and who you are, and some sections might be reserved for later, and some you might realize right away. So first, I read the literature out of enjoyment. Second is more out of a scholarly commentary kind of things. I enjoy people's views on it. And then, kind of like a normal literature class, how does it apply to me and the society we live in, and seeing things formulated and repeating again and again and again. As Campbell, I believe, said once, myths are facts that never happen, but continue to happen almost every single day.
Very cool. Yeah, that's. There's a lot of what you said that resonates with my approach as well, and my general understanding of the approach to mythology, or the symbolism. And I certainly, for me, it was when I took that comparative religion class back in spring of 2011, I think it was, and it was the first time I had a professor sort of lay out what he thought were the three ways in which people typically approach religion. And I've talked about this a few times in a number of my videos, and it was the first time I ever had someone conceptualize that, where one can approach religion from a very reductionist, very skeptical perspective, and one can also approach it from I guess you could say, the typical religious perspective. Like, all these things I'm reading are for sure true, and it typically lends itself to a more literalistic perspective. But the one that I had, I had heard of Carl Jung, obviously, and I had heard of Joseph Campbell, and I had been reading them up to that point, but I had never took the step to actually apply their methodology to my own understanding of religion. It's like I would read Carl Jung and go, okay, this is interesting. This is a psychologist who's studying religion, but I never thought of actually applying his methodology to my own understanding. And then as I took the course, that particular class, I found myself experiencing something that you described very well, which is like, you're faced with fundamentalists on both sides, and you don't feel like you necessarily agree with either side, but there luckily is this third course you can take, and I feel like that's best represented by Jung and Joseph Campbell. So it's good stuff.
Yeah, I think before then, I wasn't really sure right off the bat how to use it. And like you, I was at Keystone College, and there was a professor there who also had a comparative religion class. I didn't sign up for it, but she allowed people to come in and sit in. And one of my art buddies said, "Hey, I'm taking this awesome class. You like debating religion and stuff. How about you come in?" And it was great. When I couldn't make it, she made recordings, and that's when I was introduced to Power of the Myth. And basically, Campbell showed me how to use it, and I'm really glad that we took the time when you were reading Carl Jung, that I was able to do that with you, because I had a really hard time getting through the material because it's textbook format, and it was kind of hard to understand, but I knew it was extremely important to take the time to do it, learning about archetypes and how all that stuff worked in the background, to be more exact, to have a foundation of where all these other scholars were coming from, like Eric Newman later that I read. He wrote the Birth of Consciousness, I believe it was, and The Great Mother, talking about all these things. And it put it together as a foundation, on what was happening that was already happening in the process. I guess I was able to label what was going on. And once I labeled it and knew what it was, I could use it as a tool. I guess what happened was I was handed a toolbox that I didn't know what all the tools were. And once I started reading Carl Jung and Campbell, I realized what the names of those tools were and how to use them, and then create something, you know.
Certainly, and I think something that's really important about this, and I like the metaphor of a toolbox, and I think that something that's really important is about this, I guess what I could say, this third perspective, what I like to call usually the symbolic or the psycho-spiritual perspective, is it's open to people of various backgrounds, people who may have an opinion about, maybe certain metaphysical positions. Like, for an example, I would consider myself some kind of post-theist, I don't know, deist. It depends on the day of the week, really. But I know for you, you consider yourself, at least last time I checked, you consider yourself an agnostic. But I think what's nice about this particular perspective is that you can have these tools available to people regardless of what their opinion might be as far as a metaphysical claim. Because as Jung himself said, from his perspective, he really wouldn't feel comfortable making a concrete metaphysical claim because that was, his opinion, beyond his purview. So while he could talk about spirituality or psychological experiences, and the resonating feeling people get when they read mythology or sacred scripture, it doesn't necessarily have to pigeonhole anyone into a particular metaphysical opinion.
Yeah, and that was a big thing that I had issue with, was being pigeonholed. It came down to the belief system telling me what I can and can't read and what I can and can't explore. And I think by taking on agnosticism, it also freed me up, like you were saying, against what I was seeing at that period in time. It's toned down a little bit, the atheist extremist view, because why read the Bible? It's all just fairy tales. Exactly that. It's metaphors and stuff that can be used, and I think it freed me up. So on the other side of that, you had people like Dawkins and others who were very outspoken atheists, and I believe they need to be, because they were battling outspoken fundamentalism on the evangelical side. Who said, there's no such thing as agnosticism. You need to come over. But I took that as them kind of trying to bully me into a certain mindset or idea about it, just like I was bullied by fundamentalism from the other side. So to me, I dropped it like a hot potato and stepped back, and I enjoy it so much. I can go in and sit in a Sunday school class and have a very good, productive discussion with Baptists and all kinds of people. On the other side, I can talk about what's wrong with belief systems and how to go about doing it with atheists. And just like with the Rational Response Squad, I always wished that people in groups like that on the non-believing side educated their viewers more, because education and knowing the literature and knowing the theology comes in very handy when you're discussing and talking, because you're not talking to a person, especially if you're on YouTube like this. You're talking to an audience. And you're not debating a person, but you're trying to get your message out to others. And a lot of times, believers will have their script they read, and non-believers need that, and they need that background education to counteract some of that apologist and those ideas.
Yeah, and you know, it's interesting you mentioned Dawkins because I recently started to reread The God Delusion, and I just read, you know, I think it was just last night where he does tackle agnosticism, and yeah, you know, even though I don't really consider myself an agnostic when it comes to all metaphysical things that I typically contemplate, but even when I read his treatment of agnosticism, I felt like it was, yeah, I certainly got the sense that he was trying to say that agnostics just need to pick a side, and I think from his perspective, you know, pick the atheism, um, which you know I thought was rather, you know, I don't know, yeah, very pushy, and I'm looking at it now, you know, and one thing that I think is interesting because I think you have a good point about, you know, you said, you know, you wish that people would educate their audience or educate their own group, and I think one thing that I know I'm not the first one to bring this up because other people who are, you know, actually Jungian analysts have brought this up, but on page, I have a paperback edition of The God Delusion right here, and on page 73, you know, he's got his spectrum of belief, I believe it is. You know, number one is a strong theist, etc. And it's interesting because as we're talking about Carl Jung, he says, number one, strong theist, 100% certain probability of God. In other words, in the words of C.G. Jung, I do not believe I know. Now, what's interesting about that, about him using Jung as a strong theist, Jungians have done a good job of responding to that and saying, well, look, that's not even what Jung meant when he said, I don't believe I know. That particular quote came from a BBC interview that he gave before he died. And he you know, he got a lot of flack from a lot of different people saying he didn't believe that he knew and asking to clarify. And he wasn't making a metaphysical claim. He was talking about the God image or the God archetype. And that's what he meant. But see, Richard Dawkins doesn't even provide that nuance in his book and actually calls Jung a strong theist, which I don't even know if that would even be appropriate. So, you know, it's I just found it really ironic that within the same section where he's, you know, poking fun at agnosticism, he misrepresents, as far as I can tell, Carl Jung.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I had an issue with a little bit in Aeon and reading his response to Job, and I talked to you about it, how much he used Christianity in it. But I like the idea that you said it could have been anything, and that was the tool that he used to explain the process. It didn't necessarily have to be that, but that's the tool that he knew best to explain the processes on what was going on to convey what he was trying to get across in those writings. Um, like I was wishing, man, I wish he didn't talk about Christianity so much, but that was what he knew, you know. And I don't think you could call him a theologian. Um, I guess he would be, just because he talked a lot about it. It wasn't a set form out of a belief system. It was more abstract, and he could pretty much do anything he wanted with it because he had the freedom to do it.
Yeah, I mean, from his own words, he never claimed to be a theologian, and he was not trying to make metaphysical statements. I don't know the exact reference, but I know because I have the 2-volume set of his collected letters, which are by no means the entire library that would consist of his correspondence, because the Philemon Foundation is slowly starting to publish these unpublished letters, previously unpublished letters, but the collected letters are from, you know, when he was a young student studying psychiatry all the way until, you know, the year of his death. But I know in one letter he makes probably the only metaphysical statement that he you know, or something about religion. I can't remember the exact letter, but it's like someone pretty much, you could tell, because in this collection of letters, they don't have the the person he's corresponding with, they don't have their letter. It's just all of his responses or letters to people. But you can tell by the way he's writing this particular letter that this person, whoever wrote to him, basically was like, Dr. Jung, just cut to the chase and tell me what you think seriously about metaphysical claims. And even staying true to form, of course, he was very abstract even in this particular letter, but he was willing to at least say that he probably would agree with like a liberal form of Christianity or a liberal form of, and he was impressed by elements of Islam and things like that. But, you know, he again was still very vague. But having said that, he never claimed to be something that he wasn't, which was he wasn't a theologian. He was purely studying these matters from a psychological perspective. And I believe even in Answer to Job, before he even begins the analysis of Job and the New Testament, the book of Revelations, he's very clear, at least if I recall, in the intro to the book itself, he basically says that, look, all of these scriptural references, all of these theological concepts, I'm looking at this purely because from a psychological perspective. All of these things are psychical in nature, and I'm not trying to say that the virgin birth literally happened in time and space and history, but rather what is the importance psychologically of the virgin birth.
Yeah, I think too, people took those kinds of ideas and ran with it, I think, in the wrong direction sometimes, especially dealing with things like the rise of a New Age movement back in the day. And it kind of, in some ways, cheapened mysticism, I believe, because people were combining a whole bunch of different things and collecting things that they really didn't fully understand why they had them in the first place and why they felt the way they did. I think, especially even outside of psychology, they took a lot from Buddhism and especially Native Americanism, and I think that running the wrong way for profit and money isn't the way to go either. But on the other hand, it did create this fulfilling kind of thing, like maybe a Happy Meal, where you got a whole bunch of things, you ate it, it felt good, but maybe you didn't know what was in the hamburger or how they cooked the fries. And I think Christianity did a lot of that too. You had things like Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah, and then stuff like the German theologian Meister Eckhart coming out with these profound things. And today, because people really, I don't think, know how to use them properly, it's been cheapened in some ways,
I think that's an excellent point to bring up. The concept of running in the wrong direction or the cheapening of something, because I think that is the perspective that some people and I think it's a good critique. I'm thinking back on a few videos back that I made when I was responding to Sam Harris and some of the things that he had said about the quote-unquote metaphysical perspective, or metaphorical, excuse me, because he actually takes a shot at Joseph Campbell in one of his footnotes at the end of Faith. And I think where Sam Harris is coming, well, first off, I think he's coming from a place of ignorance. I highly doubt that Sam Harris, and I'd be willing to say this because, let me just say what I was going to say. I highly doubt that he's actually done a serious reading of Carl Jung or Joseph Campbell. My reasoning for thinking this is because if one were to actually read their works, you wouldn't make the, albeit parody, but blunder that Sam Harris makes in his attempt to mock Joseph Campbell's position. I mean, he essentially says, "Oh, we can take anything as spiritual," and then he proceeds to have a recipe in a cookbook. Oh, well, it doesn't really mean 2 pinches of salt. That actually means blah blah blah, and that's ignoring an actual system of thought that has existed for a long time. It permeates all world religions, namely the non-literal reading of scripture. And so but having said that, I think your critique is a good one, because I'm sure there are people out there that do what Sam Harris is criticizing. They see, they just run wild with it. They pretty much abandon any sense of a foundation and essentially say, oh, well, I can find any spiritual truth in pretty much anything that I do. And perhaps that sort of unrestrained approach is something that probably does warrant some criticism.
Yeah, I think a lot of times back when I used to watch a lot more videos of responses to apologists, that would be thrown out just because they haven't read the base literature. And reading the base literature is always important. You and that's where it would start out at. And any people that I run into interested in Bible, and they say, oh, I want to read Bar Ehrman, I want to read Old Testament scholars and commentaries. Forget all that. You got to read the text first and find a really good translation. And I'm just going to use Judaism as an example, because I tend to gravitate more towards those ideas a little bit more. So I have a conservative commentary, and then I have a liberal commentary, and then I have this metaphoric thing where I just read it and find out what's going on, how the characters are interacting in the stories, and then how I accidentally find myself or find somebody else in those types of situations. Even in Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, many times I accidentally found myself being like the raging Achilles, where I may be so angry, or maybe say, okay, maybe I'm going overboard here, I need to step back a notch. Or like Hector, who's fully human. He's not a god. He doesn't know his end like Achilles does. And he thinks maybe he has a chance, so he throws the spear at Achilles. I don't know, and I am imperfect, and that's what's amazing about the interchangeable metaphor, is that all these heroes that you read about in literature, they were imperfect people, and even in the Iliad and the Odyssey, half deities, half gods were even imperfect. And it seems that even Zeus himself made mistakes that he needed to go back and fix. And even in Jewish texts, you see that happening too, where the theology tries to smooth it over as well they should, but where Yahweh or the divine regrets, or he regrets making decisions, or regrets certain things that happen or come about. And that says a lot. And so that tells me that I can live life and try to do the right thing, and for justice and mercy and all that kind of stuff to think about. But also, I'm going to screw up big time. And when I screw up, how I handle that is also a big part of it. So I don't know if I got off track there, but.
So I think it's, it really, what you're talking about is that it's really a place to see, how deep mythology and world traditions or scripture, how they speak to the human condition, and how they do serve a purpose, and I think that a dismissal of them, or at least the study of them in this context is I would say is detrimental. And like I said, I think that's why it's obvious to me that people like Sam Harris and, like I said, Richard Dawkins, misusing Jung, for an example, just shows that they are either unaware or unwilling to look at this particular perspective, because, and this is just my opinion, but I think were not easy targets. I think the dogmatists, and the literalists and the skeptics, they make great playmates for each other. I mean, they really it's a match made in heaven, if you will, and or hell, depending on who you're talking to. But it's but I think you have to. I don't know. I think this position of ours is one that requires a lot more study, and it's just not as easy to pick apart uh, because we're not really engaging in the typical cliche debates that I think the other two positions typically engage in with each other.
Yeah, I think what's amazing is people who come out of uh, evangelicalism into a form of maybe unbelief or agnostic or atheist tend to do a lot better on these types of debates. I know, King Heathen and Matt Dillinger, who does the show. He takes calls from people like G-Man and stuff. They're very well educated in the background literature. They know the belief systems, how they came about, and they know that the theology and how it came about. And that's something that was missing that I seen in a lot of the videos of the young kids coming on, just talking foolish. Even Thunderfoot got into that one time when he was doing a response on the 23rd Psalm, and I was sitting there yelling at my screen the whole time because he was just botching it. And even a lot of both believers and atheists came on and said, stick to science. You're really bad at this stuff. Because what was amazing is Hebrew wordplay in a lot of these texts associate with something totally different, that you can milk the literature for all it's worth. And they have these stages that they go through. I believe there's 7 steps. There's an acronym for it. I don't really know what it is, but I can't remember it now. But it's 7 steps of understanding a text. And I just thought it was pretty amazing when I found that out, what that was. And so now I try to go through all that myself. But also I add the psychological and scientific view of it. Yeah.
Well, I think you bring up a good point about Thunderfoot and people who approach scripture from that perspective. Because I've been my past couple of videos, I've been watching this exchange between IERA, the British Muslim Dawa initiative, and led by Hamza Zortzis, and also this atheist Essence of Thought, Peter Thurston. And I enjoy those types of exchanges because, again, here are the two other camps at war with each other. But I think one thing that I find fascinating about their exchange, which is something that I think the individuals who share our perspective can add to the exchange, is again this third perspective. Because one example that I had was a video that Peter or Essence of Thought made about this verse in the Quran, which I believe is chapter 25, verse 53, which is about a barrier existing between the two types of water, which is usually interpreted as meaning, the salt water. And I think it actually describes it as such: salt water and fresh water. And I know people like Hamza Zortzis and Muslim literalists, they try to package their religion and their interpretations into using science, and this is something that I think is rather problematic, because you're taking a text which we might say was not meant to be taken literally, or at least 100% of it literally, where there's a deeper reading behind it. And in some ways, by them saying, oh, look, there's a scientific concept that fits this verse, they're setting themselves up for two things. One, if that scientific claim is somehow disproven, then what are you going to do with that verse, with that interpretation? Or, and the second thing is you're setting yourself up for criticism by people like Peter or Essence of Thought, which is, the video that he made, that was purely his criticism on showing the typical literalist Muslim perspective or interpretation of this verse is fundamentally scientifically false. And so, I remember when I used to be in that camp, I remember thinking the whole scientific claims on a literal interpretation was awesome. But then I started thinking about it, and I started realizing, well, wait a minute, what if physicists decide the Big Bang Theory isn't the correct model of the origin of the cosmos? And then what are you going to do with the verse that Muslims have been saying for a long time has to do with the Big Bang? Literal reading, right? And so what I found out is there are Muslim mystical interpretations of that verse in question, chapter 25, verse 53, that does not read the text literally, but rather says that God is talking about two types of people represented by the fresh water and one represented by the salt water. And the barrier is they don't mix. Those types of people do not mix. And there's a barrier between them. And I think that is a better reading and a safer reading, instead of petrifying your beliefs into being dependent on scientific concepts because of your literalism. But I think it's also a good example of a more psychological reading of a text. So I just thought that was interesting. I wanted to point that out.
Yeah, I think too, the reason why there's so much trouble between the readings and the scientific view is the idea of assimilation. And I talked about this quite a bit. And people are so afraid of being assimilated, as well they should be. You don't want mixing, and this is why I believe sometimes Judaism had the separation between the clean and unclean, and people really don't understand the purity laws, and there's probably 100 explanations for each of them. A lot of them, it was, other nations do this, but you do this. Don't mix threads in your clothes, and don't eat these types of animals, and the whole thing. Mainly, a lot of groups are afraid of what they might attract, and you see this happening in Muslim countries now in retaliation to the West. And I think too, this is a big problem for what's going on with ISIS currently, is they want to purify this whole thing, but I think that the leadership themselves are doing it for personal gain, and not truly forcing out this kind of assimilation that they see happening. Over here, they see the millennials as a type of assimilation, because a lot of times they hold more liberal ideas. The Barna Group, in a couple books that I read, which is it's called You Lost Me and Unchristian, the two books. The Barna Group is a Christian organization that does runs polls and stats for church groups. And they found that one of the biggest gripes of non-believers and also believers that are millennials is against the gay and lesbian ideas that the church holds, and also judgmentalism and being hypocrites, which is tough, because here the text that they're given is plainly an apocalyptic text. The New Testament is very apocalyptic. Jesus was very apocalyptic. And things in there plainly say things. The Old Testament, I don't even want to say Hebrew Scriptures, very apocalyptic, where they're always looking to something better. And there's something to be said also about apocalypticism, because here your current stance is so pessimistic that your dreams of the future, you don't put much effort into it, which is totally decimated the evangelical mind when the Christian right came to power during the Ronald Reagan era up till almost today. It's kind of waning a little bit because the country, I believe, is center left. But you have this vision of the future being totally destroyed by these apocalyptic views, but we're allowed to change it. And when we do, when we change it to something else, so we can envision something else and start working on that, you still had the establishment being a little upset with that. However, they're starting to die off and things are starting to open up. Definitely gay marriage being legalized in the United States is huge. Churches are going to gripe about it a little bit, but all those people are going to start going to church. They're going to assimilate. They're not going to like it. But how much do we assimilate, I guess? And how much do we want to save the literature and those ideas? And how much do we want to let go of it? And I guess that's the question that people have always battled through the ages, you know?
Right. Change can be a scary thing for a lot of people, especially if they, are really invested in what they perceive as being the status quo. So I just briefly, I noticed that the viewer count keeps fluctuating from 0 to 3. So I just want to say, for people who might be watching this on multiple platforms, again, I have not broadcasted before, so I don't know how many people are truly watching or what the deal with that is. But if you're just now joining us, this is Dreaming in Symbols. My co-host is Wayman29. I am Colin, aka Aussie CDA, and we're talking about the Jungian approach to understanding religion and scripture, life in general. And I do know that I did initiate the Q&A option for people who might be watching this on the Google Plus screen. I don't know whether this works for seeing it on my YouTube main page, but if people are watching this on the Google Plus, page, and if you want to ask a question or type a question, Wayman and I can tackle that at some point here. Like I said, I don't know how many people are actually watching since the counter keeps changing, but I just want to put that out there. So yeah, I think that these are some good points to raise as far as, with the changes that are happening right now with society and people's approach to religion. And I think I'm reminded of certain polls that have been issued that, the category of spiritual but not religious is growing amongst millennials. And if they are looking for a community to join, it's one that is totally not based on dogma. I think that's why Unitarian Universalism is still a pretty growing group that's getting larger. And I know I posted this on Twitter, but I know that there was an article. I'll see if I can find it, since I did want to bring in some particular news articles that are relevant to things that we might be discussing. But I know that there was an article published somewhere that did talk about sort of places of worship or people getting together for spiritual purposes that are unique and unconventional. It may have been something like unconventional places of worship or gathering for the purposes of spiritual contemplation. And I, for the life of me, I'm actually, as I'm talking, kind of skimming down through my Twitter feed here, trying to find it. I'll give myself another 5 seconds. If I can't find it, then I'll just talk about it based on my memory of reading it. But it was essentially talking about people meeting. Yeah, okay, I'm not gonna be able to find it, but people talking about meeting like in cafes, or the concept that going to a physical church building in the conventional sense is starting to become a thing of the past, and how especially people, millennials and others, are starting to meet more like in bars and cafes, or meeting like in libraries, or the houses of worship are combining. So you've got liberal folks. I think in the article they talked about a church that also serves as a synagogue and a mosque. Because it may have been something about the lack of numbers and they just thought they wanted to get together. But something tells me a group like that, where you've got the three Abrahamic religions under one roof, and there aren't bombs going off, they're probably pluralistic, liberal-minded people. So I think this article did a good job of sort of covering the change in which people are discussing spirituality and the atmosphere that they want to be in. And I think that's it'd probably be shocking for your traditional conservative churchgoer, but I think that's a good point to raise as far as the atmosphere or the environment in which people are seeking out community.
Yeah, I think the evangelical movement, however, have latched onto that, and they realize that to no end. And at one point, I was invited to a church, and I say, "Oh, sure, I'll go to church with you," and they say, "Oh, it's not our traditional church." So I'm thinking, okay, it's going to be multi-denominational kind of thing, and yeah, I was wrong. It was evangelicalism all overs. They had the band and people clapping and praise Jesus, the whole 9 yards. And also, I see a lot of evangelicals leaving their churches and buying up storefronts. These are the same kinds of groups taking advantage of this whole, oh, we're a non-traditional church. Look, I'm wearing my sandals while I preach the same sermon and teach things the same way. However, we just repackaged it. So while things are gravitating maybe on the more liberal side to that, churches are definitely taking advantage of that, and I see it happening all the time. So I personally felt like I was tricked. I'm like thinking it would be something like you were discussing here. A bunch of people doing different things, but straight up evangelical Sunday school, the whole 9 yards. And I was amazing. I found it amusing, and I enjoyed myself, actually.
Yeah, I'm very hesitant when I get invites, and usually it's fascinating how people who are, not to totally pick on evangelicals, but why not, right? The whole thing of, I swear they have a certain way of talking about their religion where I can spot an evangelical by talking to them for less than a minute. It's just the way in which they go about describing their connection to God. They use certain buzzwords, certain phraseology. I mean, it's like, if you were to blindfold someone and show them an old Venom Fang X video and not tell them who they were listening to, they would know within 2 minutes what this person's perspective was. So I am usually very hesitant, because I have been invited by people to go to some of their shindigs, and I'm very hesitant about it, depending on what I perceive as being their MO. But one thing that comes up even within my own spiritual community as of right now, what's the Swedenborgian community, is it's a very small denomination, and there's like a dozen people that maybe come to church on Sunday, and we all sit around, and people have their cups of coffee, and it's programmed, but it's very laid back and chill, and there's like a moment during the service where people can have like open discussion about what was described in the talk, and so I think, and we also have like study groups that meet in like coffee shops and stuff, and it's very chill and laid back. So I think there's going to be more of that as time goes on, because one thing that that Jung himself certainly predicted, and this was based on his interpretation of the Book of Revelations and these apocalyptic literature, is the fact that consciousness, the way we do things, is going to be changing as time goes on. I mean, he saw things. I mean, he took the creation of the dogma of the ascension of the Virgin as being evidence of something changing, at least in the Roman Catholic tradition. But he really thought that end times scriptures were talking about a change in consciousness, an expansion of consciousness, a change in which we approach things globally. And I'd be willing to say that from my reading of it, he predicted right, because I think that things are, the way that people are approaching spirituality is changing ever since his death in 1961. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it would do both communities good to do as you say, like maybe get together and do discussions outside of the church environment. Because when you're in the church, the environment itself, sometimes you feel you need to gravitate towards a certain thing, because it's considered some sacred space or whatnot. And I think when you're in a secular environment, it kind of takes the pressure off to only view it one way. And sometimes I'll even try when I'm invited places in their Sunday school classes to open up to scholars and things like that, what maybe outside of their own theology. And quoting scholars in a Sunday school class is a huge no-no because, as you know from the movies, God is not dead. Stereotypically, if you're mentioning scholars, unless it's a minister doing a commentary, um, to live translation, and there are a bunch of atheists, and you hear it all the time, like, oh, you're really smart in this area, but what about spiritually? I don't think, obviously it's not fair to say that, but it also gets their mind going on uh, what might be other interpretations. And that's one reason why I liked Judaism, was because you had all these people debating all these different things, and you could have a million things come out of a single chapter or a single section of verses on how it is, and what they thought about it. And very heated debates, um, and nobody was really, well, you get upset about it, but you kind of stuck to the topic, I guess. I think it frees up the mind to be more creative, and to use those metaphors in ways that you would like to use them. Um, because I think sometimes people, when they're supposed to be using a rake, think they ought to stick to the shovel, and they're kind of barred from using the rake because stereotypically the rake is bad.
Yeah, I like that. I think that that's you know, thinking about, but actually, I watched that movie God is Not Dead, and I actually checked it out of my local library, not really knowing what it was about. I sometimes just grab stuff and not even really paying attention. I popped it in, and I was, I got about 15, 20 minutes in and went, oh, it's going to be this type of movie, and but I think it's a movie of the times. I was sitting there going, well, I don't agree with the main character. I don't agree with the atheist professor. I think this is, but I think it was a good, it was good to watch because it really shows you at least one camp's perspective of the other, and sort of like adding to their own personal mythology, as far as how they perceive atheists, or the stereotypical atheist professor. But yeah, I also agree that Judaism, and to some extent, just any scholars or any living tradition that has this attitude that you can have multiple perspectives, you can have multiple interpretations on a text, um, and that's okay. I think that that's something that, unfortunately, from what I've seen, um, a lot of religious folks, traditional religious folks, just want to abandon that particular tradition, which is why I've done a few blog posts on talking about the need for a renaissance, a rediscovery of this type of tradition for not just literalist Muslims, but literalist Christians, evangelical Christians, hyper conservative Zionist Jews, whatever, because I think they've abandoned this rich tradition of the sort of like scripture having multiple layers of understanding, and that's okay, and that the literal application is not and should not be the primary reading of the text.
Yeah, and sometimes it pains me to know that people have a whole library of books and they suffer without applying it at all. And even kids in a simple literature class in high school, just bungling their way through it and not really applying it and figuring out the reasons why it was written in the first place, whether it's a work of fiction or whatever. And I don't think that schools spend enough time on that. I don't think that an hour of Sunday school class or an hour of study and maybe a Wednesday night Bible study is enough at all. I know I beat myself up when I don't read at least an hour a day on something, and maybe think about it. And also, too, it gives you a database, kind of what you can tell somebody or give an example of, maybe to help somebody out who might be in a story that you just read, and you realize it, and you're saying, this could be your end if you keep going this way, or, hey, this is kind of a positive thing that you're doing. Keep doing it because I know the ending of it. I just read about it. And it's pretty amazing when you can use it that way. Technology, while data collecting and the whole thing, the easy search is great, but I think it's at the expense of creativity and imagination and ingenuity, because it's taxing us in other ways that we don't realize.
Yeah, and I think looking back on how I used to approach religion, it's like, to me, the taxing thing, it was like a form of burnout, because you're constantly worried the text is going to conform to, well, at least, for me, it was a literalistic approach. I mean, even though it was strange, because even though back when I considered myself a Sunni Muslim, I was very much attracted to like Sufi mystical interpretation. I certainly read what might be considered more liberal commentators and translators like Abdullah Yusuf Ali and Muhammad Assad's translation, because they typically looked at things symbolically. But I guess when I first converted, I actually started really looking at things quite literally. I was very obsessed with the apologetics of, again, kind of like what Hamza Zortzis does and what Ira does, which is finding verses that you think can literally apply to scientific truths, and then using that to convince people, look how wonderful this text is, and I think one response that I've had from people who I've had conversations with about this particular subject is I can't remember who brought this up. It may have been a Muslim, it may have been a non-Muslim, I can't remember. But someone said, people found the beauty of Islamic scripture well before there was ever a literal scientific application of any of its verses. So there was something about the wonderment of tradition where you don't really need to play this literalism game, really, and I think that's an excellent point, because I think it causes people to constantly be in a world of argument and trying to convince themselves by convincing other people that, look, this is the application of these texts, and this is why this is so miraculous. But I think taking the position of Carl Jung and Joseph Campbell and looking at things more mythologically or psychologically, it's like, you can appreciate all of these scriptures equally without doing this literalist game or this, endeavor to prove things scientifically, which I really think is just a way of them trying to do dawah or evangelism to the other camp, which is the atheist skeptical camp, because they're trying to speak their language, quote unquote, of science.
Yeah, I think a lot of times too that ends up becoming exhausting because you can only stretch the rubber band so far. And I remember talking to a Baptist minister friend of mine. I still am friends with him. He put out a book, The Fury of God, And I went and bought it, and he was doing a Bible study on his blog, and I started writing essays in response to some of those ideas, and I was posting them to his theological blog. I got busy in the summer, and I didn't finish it, and I eventually want to go back and revisit that. But I was talking to him, and he said, I said, what makes it so special, and why do you believe it? And to him, it was the miracles in Jesus, and to me, that wasn't a whole lot. There was so much more to it, I guess, than simply, the miracles made it come alive. But for me, it was something different. For me, I could toss large sections of it and just go by, say, Matthew 25, which, is about the sheep and the goats. I was hungry and you gave me food, and I was naked and you gave me clothes, sick and you comforted me, and in jail you came to visit me. And doing all those things without even knowing it, because some say, when was it that we did all these things? And when you did it to the least of these, my people, the least of these, you did it to me, myself. And so, that whole thing is the core of it to me. I could go without the Pauline theology. I could go without all the other attachments to that and save that one section of New Testament. I'm not saying that that's either more important or I don't need anything else. Later on, I might be able to use something else to it. But I think they only allow themselves to go so far. Maybe they know how long the rubber band can go before it snaps, because they've seen other people snap. But beyond that is the unknown, and they're looking into the abyss. They're not sure, and they're afraid to step off the edge because maybe their parachute has too big of a hole. I don't know what it is. It's fear. It's being swallowed up. The whole thing. And but once you get there, you wonder why you had all the debate about it in the first place.
Absolutely, yeah. It's I think that's an excellent metaphor of being willing to jump into the abyss, but perhaps the fear is that you have a hole in your parachute. I think, yeah. I mean, and I do sympathize with people who are afraid to take that leap. Because I was there myself, and I know that you were there yourself as well. So I think that it's, it can be very scary for people, but I think it is, it really is the as Jung would say, the dying and of the old self and the rising of the new self. It's something that is this ego death and resurrection, and that's never an easy thing for anybody to do. But I certainly think the benefit of at least exploring your tradition, or at least taking a critical stance of your tradition and not being afraid to do that, is something that I think is really paramount for our current age. Because I'm not even suggesting, I think it'd be totally fine if there were people, and I know that these certain people like this exist, there could be individuals that do still take a more literalist approach, a more dogmatic approach, but they are willing to at least engage in some form of intellectual criticism. I think that's why I do enjoy, even though I would not agree with him socially or politically, but this is why I enjoy listening to like Dr. James White, Dr. Oakley on YouTube, because he is totally enshrined in his Protestant doctrines, for sure, which is not something that I would not agree with, which is why I think he's still very much solid in the that second camp, the one that's very much wrapped into dogmatism and doctrine. But one thing that separates him from, say, Pat Robertson is his willingness to actually reflect on the textual criticism of the Bible. And while he might come to a different conclusion than, let's say, Bart Ehrman, he's at least willing to engage in that. And that tells me that at least there's some open-minded, there's some individuals that are willing to step into the abyss. They may have a rope, perhaps, and they're making a slow descent into the abyss with the idea that they can crawl back up, but at least they make frequent expeditions into the abyss, which I think is better than not even jumping off or engaging with it at all.
Yeah, I for some reason had a hard time with Dr. Oakley, and it's good to know maybe he's got a rope going down and coming back finally. Because back when I used to watch him, he had a hard time. That's back when Jordan Day had his channel, and he was self-taught Greek, and he was challenging Dr. Oakley on a lot of different things concerning text authenticity and things like that out of the New Testament, and dating different things. And but his if he, this is what I always thought about Dr. Oakley, if he would look at his own belief system as with scrutiny as he did when he debates Islam, I think a lot could be learned from that. And he doesn't seem to. He seems to go so far and then maybe turn it off. And that's kind of what I wish people would overcome in certain ways. I guess you are doing it, but maybe not far enough. But then, how do I know? Maybe it is far enough for him. And maybe I just expect too much. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I have rather low expectations for people, to be honest, because I just don't want to assume anything of anyone, But and by no means am I saying that the Dr. Oakley or James White is, yeah, he certainly has his own barriers, and he certainly is convinced of the truth claims of his particular brand of Protestant Christianity. But the only credit that I will give him is the fact that, yes, he is willing to engage in this type of debate. He appears to be willing to look at criticism of the textual transmission of the New Testament. But no, he certainly, like I said, he's still firmly in what I call camp number 2, which is the more doctrinal, dogmatic perspective. Because that certainly that's how he is. If he were to join, let's say, you and I in camp number 3, he would cease to be a traditional Protestant Christian, and that's a huge part of his identity, obviously, is being a scholar minister in that particular camp.
Yeah, there was one time we were in a chat, and maybe some viewers know who that was. A Christian apologist come on. He has a website, the whole thing. And we were asking him questions. He totally mopped the floor with us because we were so unprepared. And he had it down, the structure of it down. He's done it a million times. And I actually left that chat feeling angry and disappointed in the people that were there at not being up on their game, and even myself being up on my game, to be able to dispel or answer back some of the things that he was bringing up. And it was amazing. And then afterwards, after I was upset about it, I was like, wow, for him to come on and to do that sort of thing is pretty amazing. His daughter ended up leaving the faith. I can't remember who the guy's name is. Maybe Ruben or some other people would know, because I think they were in on that. Yeah, it was pretty embarrassing.
Yeah, it's I mean, people certainly know, they know their stuff. Some people do, depending on what their tradition is and what their perspective is. And it reminds me of some of the good old stick-am days of people having, debates, and there were some pretty vicious moments, but there were some pretty fascinating times too, um, but yeah, I think that's one thing that I appreciate about when I marvel at James White. Even though I don't agree with everything that comes out of his mouth, but he certainly has done his homework, and he talks a good talk. And I think he's much more prepared and more convincing than his typical opponents. And I look at this objectively now, because I've watched these debates, and I have no dog in the fight anymore. So I can just look at it as like this neutral observer and just totally judge them on the quality of their argumentation, the quality of the evidence they present. And I made a video a while back talking about this, and people got pissed off at me for saying this, that I suggested that James White kick the crap out of his Muslim apologetic opponents. And the fact is, it's true. The reason why people can't see that is because they're rooting for one team or the other. But I marveled at this objectively and just thought, objectively speaking, James White does a damn good job when he debates. And I think that that's something to be said for that, and something that everyone can strive for. I don't think, it's one thing to kind of say, as you said, like, okay, you kind of thought to yourself, damn, that was disappointing that we just got our butts handed to us. But then that can motivate people to then delve deeper into their own research or be better prepared the next time around, and to continue excellent discussions and points of dialogue.
Yeah, getting back to using the metaphor, I read this really good book, and I brought it up to you. Let me grab it real quick. This is Understanding the Borderline Mother, Helping Your Children Transcend Intense, Unpredictable, and Volatile Relationship by Christine Ann Lawson. And in here, she uses metaphor, the Grimm fairy tales, to label a lot of the issues that she's seen in the different forms of borderline personality disorder. And when I read this, I completely related, and I'll never read Grimm again the same way. And I plowed right through this book, and I drank it down like a really good beer, because the way she was using the stories and applying them to psychology and borderline personality disorder was almost straight out of Jung and Campbell on how they would use it in a positive way. Like, this was explained amazing. So I don't know if any of the viewers could get a hold of this book. I have it right on the shelf with Eric Newman, The Great Mother, and Carl Jung. So that was a book that I recently read. I know I just jumped the topic there, but it was a very refreshing book to read on metaphor being applied to psychology.
No, I appreciate you mentioning that. Yeah, you anchored us back to the to the topic, which is good. Yeah, I think I've heard of that title in particular. Pretty sure I've heard of it, but I haven't read it myself. And I'm wondering, is the author's background, is she a psychologist or a psychoanalyst or a Jungian, or just out of curiosity?
I'm not sure.
Okay, yeah, no, it's but all the same, I think that's a great example of application, and who would have thought, the people who maybe aren't familiar with this particular approach, that you could actually take grim fairy tales and find some psychological meaning behind it. I think that's a great example. So yeah, I would, I'll certainly plan on checking out the book, and I would encourage anybody watching this now or when it's posted on my YouTube page as a recording to certainly check out um, that particular title as a good example. Because that's something that I think is really important when reading Jungians or even Freudians, is the idea that you can take scripture or mythology or fairy tales and actually find real life application for it, which makes it keeps it relevant. It doesn't petrify the text into some sort of dried up dogma that a group of men typically thought of, centuries ago. It keeps things fresh and original and real for real life situations.
Well, I think I need to take off. I'm sorry if I was cutting it short in any way, but it was a pleasure being on, and as always, it was awesome talking to you. Spent some time, and thanks again for reading all those Carl Jung books with me, and it really helped me get through the literature. And I know sometimes I PM you and say, "Oh, hey, I discovered this or that." So please keep sending book recommendations my way. I know I'm favored your friend on Goodreads, and if anybody wants to join on Goodreads, you can always see what we're reading. And right now, I'm stuck with the New Testament Code by Robert Eisenman. Gave myself 3 months for that. It's 1,000 pages and a lot of Dead Sea Scroll connections and a whole bunch of different things. But I really appreciate you asking me to come on. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you for accepting the invite, and I hope to do this. My hope for the show is to do one of these episodes a week. Would be my hope. But we'll see how it goes. But I would love to have you on again. So we'll definitely be in communication to set up another day and time. I've been reluctant to kind of say like, every week Tuesdays at 4 because God knows schedules change, and I know that my schedule's going to change probably in the next 3 weeks or so. So we'll keep it kind of loose at this point, but I definitely would like to have you back on because it is always a pleasure and it's always awesome stuff. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, I think a guest that you should try to get on is Path of Abraham. I don't know if you're familiar with the user. He's currently writing a book on Job and had some excellent discussions. I attended one. I wasn't able to make the other ones on the psychological aspect of the book, the whole book of Job. And he elaborated on what he was working on and the research that he was doing. And it was pretty amazing. So I'm definitely probably going to buy that book when it comes out. I don't even know if he has a title for it yet, but he said he almost had it completed. So if you could get him on at some point, it'd be great. He's out of Judaism, and he's been in some of the Torah study groups that I've attended, and he's just an awesome guy.
Great. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I talked to him because I did attend the Interfaith Google Hangout with Ruben last night, and I think pretty sure he was there, and I got a chance to talk to him, and had no idea that he actually subscribed to my channel, and he was going to be doing a response or a comment, at least a text comment to my video about not taking the Ten Commandments literally. And so I think, or that perspective. So yeah, I would love to have him on. I think it actually says he might be watching if I go back to the Google Hangout page. But yes, Path of Abraham, you are more than welcome to be a guest in the future. And I did have a verbal confirmation from the user Klingshore to come on as a guest as well, no doubt to talk about the origins of Islam and some of his research. So yeah, I think we've got some cool stuff in the pipeline for the future. So yeah, I think it'll be great.
Okay, I guess I'm going to sign out then. Thanks again, and to the viewers, thanks for watching. I really appreciate it, and take care.
Thank you, Wayman. All right, everyone. Well, I guess I know I originally said this was going to go for an hour and a half. It's my time is 5:20 Pacific Standard Time. I guess I will start to wind down the show now with Wayman's departure. Please, I'd like to plug his channel, Wayman29, For those of you who are interested, he's got tons of videos. He's been more consistent with video making than I have. He has excellent videos talking about some of the things we've talked about in today's episode, Jungian psychology and mythology, Joseph Campbell. He does a great job of exploring the history and the archaeology of Judaism and Christianity. He mentioned that he was reading Robert Eisenman. He does a great job of summarizing what he's reading. It's good stuff. And like I said, if Path of Abraham would like to be a guest on the show in the future, I'd love to have him. And also Klingshore, would be great to have Klingshore as well. Let me just check here and see if anybody had left any questions. Again, I haven't done this before, so this is all pretty new to me. Okay, I don't see any audience questions. So like I said, with regards to talking to Wayman just now, I don't have a consistent set date of the week, or day of the week or time. Looking at my own schedule, it looks like next Tuesday, which would be August 4th at same time, would actually probably work for me personally. So having said that, if Path of Abraham or Klingshore would like to get in touch with me and see if that day of the week and at that time, Pacific Standard Time, works for them, we can try and figure something out. So yeah, if you enjoyed this particular episode, this first episode of this podcast, I encourage you to subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so already. Follow me on Google Plus for any updates. My WordPress blog, which is the same title as this podcast, Dreaming in Symbols. My Twitter account, and also, as Wayman said, Goodreads. You can see what books we happen to be reading at this particular time. If anybody has any topic suggestions for future podcasts, I would also appreciate that as well. And as always, prior to the next podcast going live, I will have the Q&A feature enabled so that people can ask specific questions before the podcast goes live. Okay, well, I think it's 5:22 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, so I think I will wrap up the show here. Thank you all for watching, and in advance, thank you for the future people who watch this recording once it posts to my YouTube channel. And special thanks again to Wayman29 for joining me. Thank you all for watching, and peace be with you all.